Well, welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host. My name's Nathan Battishall, and it's good to chat with you again today. So today, I want to talk about the low-rise reforms that came into effect in July 2024, last year, and we were hoping that there would be some additional legislation that would come into effect in the environmental planning policy that has not yet come in. So I get a lot of people asking about these new reforms, especially from the point of view, from the low-rise point of view. So today I want to talk a little bit about the low-rise point of view in terms of dual occupancies and multi-dwelling and terraces, especially in well-located areas. So we saw last year there was a lot of hype, a lot of excitement around these reforms from July 1, 2024 that came into effect for the low-rise reform. But the challenge was it wasn't originally stated this way, that it would be in stage 1 and stage 2. Now, the challenge is stage 1 really didn't give a lot of scope because it really, one great thing is that it opened up the ability to do some dual occupancies in areas where dual occupancies had not been allowed to be done in R2 zoned areas, especially within a couple of Sydney councils, one being Northern Beaches. The challenge is, though, that in these reforms, there was a lot of information withheld. For example, the width of the block, the lot size, a whole range of things. So there hasn't been a lot of movement from July last year until now over this 6 or 8 month period. There hasn't been a lot of applications that have been lodged. And just to give a bit of context, the whole reason why the Minns government or the state government introduced these reforms was due to shortage of housing supply across New South Wales. And I think I've got some information down here that there's an expectation to deliver 112,000 more homes over the next 5 years. It's a significant step towards achieving the Housing Accord targets of 377,000 new homes by July 2029. Now, if we look at the stats of DAs approved by council, even CDCs, we're well below the target. Obviously, inflation, interest rates, a whole range of things have played a role in that. So the whole point of this introduction of this low-rise policy or this low-rise standard is to try and increase the density of housing. Now, one thing I'm getting excited about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it over this short episode today for you, is this code coming into effect in well-located areas. So it's opening up opportunities across areas in New South Wales to do potentially multi-dwelling and dual occupancy developments. At the moment, the standards, there's some non-refusal standards that are going to come out. So stage 1 opened up the ability to do dual occupancies across all R2 zoned areas, bar there's a couple of councils that are excluded from that, a couple of really heavily bushfire prone areas. But it opened up a lot of areas, and there were some areas where you've not been able to do dual occupancy in R2 zoned areas. Initially, we thought when they introduced this low-rise policy, it would come out for dual occupancy and multi-dwelling / terraces. And then when that came out in July 1, 2024, we realised it was only for dual occupancy. But the challenge is it didn't come out with some of the actual constraints in terms of lot size, block width, and that side of thing. That initially in the state government's planning website, it was telling us that they were going to bring stage 2 into effect in November 2024. Then we were told December 2024. Obviously, those dates have come and gone. We're now into the new year and we still don't have a date. So as to why that's the case, we're not sure. I've been in touch with New South Wales Planning, yet to hear any firm date. They're not giving a firm date. But look, it is imminent. It looks like it is coming. Whether whether the numbers are the numbers in terms of floor space ratio, block size, block widths, that sort of thing, whether they end up being the sizes that they initially had proposed, we're yet to know. I always say until it's in policy, until it's in the SEP, I'm not going to trust it. And we even saw with the TOD that we saw that even the FSR with what they originally proposed and what they announced was slightly different. So I'm expecting there could be some variation and change. So if you are looking to get ahead of the game and buy a site early in the piece to try and buy something, I guess, a little bit cheaper now, just be aware and to be conservative because those numbers could change. But look, stage 2, essentially what's happened, and I'll even bring up some information direct. That way you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. The information I was given, this is what they've said. Stage 1 introduced new provisions into the State Environmental Planning Policy Housing 2021 that made dual occupancies and semi-detached dwellings permissible with consent in all R2 low-density residential zones across New South Wales. These provisions do not apply in certain areas affected by certain hazards and constraints, such as flooding and bushfire. And there's actually a link which we can put in the show notes with some of those areas that are excluded and some of the actual constraints like bushfire and flooding and a few others that automatically discard the ability to do dual occupancies. So then it goes on to talk about stage 2. So stage 2 is the stage I was mentioning that is not yet come into effect. So stage 1 is now in effect. That came into effect in 1st of July 2024. Stage 2, we're yet to know. It was, as I said, it was planned for November. It was then planned for December 2024. We're now in the new year and we're yet to hear. Hopefully it's coming soon. So under stage 2, these are the non-discretionary standards for dual occupancies that will apply to development applications in well-located residential areas. Outside of well-located areas, council controls will apply. So when it talks about well-located areas, this is where a lot of people are coming undone because they're thinking, oh, great, this new policy's come into effect. I can do dual occupancy on my property in the Sutherland Shire. It's only 450 square metres. If that council already has a policy, which the Shire does, for doing a dual occupancy, for example, in that council, let's just say 600 square metres, under the new policy, it might be saying, for example, 450 square metres. You still have to apply, you still have to comply with that particular council LEP and DCP control, or the LEP control for the minimum lot size, unless you are in what they call a well-located area. Now, that well-located area is across all of the Sydney councils, and there's some outer-lying areas such as the Illawarra, Newcastle, Central Coast. There's a couple of others. And if you can then use these non-discretionary standards. Once this stage 2 comes out, you'll be able to use these non-discretionary standards, and council can't refuse a DA based on those non-discretionary standards because those standards in that SEP, they sit above in terms of a hierarchy. They'll sit above council's LEP. Now, a well-located area, and it's important to get this right because I know for a fact there'll be people out there buying 450 square metre blocks in the Shire and different councils across Sydney or across the Illawarra or Central Coast. And if they're not within that well-located area, you're going to come unstuck because you still, if it's not within a well-located area, you still have to comply with council's code and council's policy around minimum lot size. So a well-located area within this policy is classed as an area that is within 800 metres of a train station. So you need to be within the 800 metres of a train station or within the 800 metres of a local centre, a local zone centre that's zoned as local centre. Now, it can't be radius either, and I've had direct feedback from Planning New South Wales. You can't just get a radius of that distance. It has to literally be a walkable distance. So you can't walk through people's backyards on a diagonal basis to get to a train station or to get to a local centre. So it has to be within 800 metres going a walking route, a walking/driving route that you would go on public roads or public footpaths. So you need to be careful there. So really make sure that you're on top of that when you're looking at, does it fit within a well-located area? And there's a whole bunch of constraints that if it's in a flood zone, straight away that will write it off, or bushfire zone. There's a few different zones, and you can look that up in the SEP. Some of these areas. So just because it's in a well-located area, if it's in a bushfire zone or a flood zone, in some of these areas, that straight away put a cross through that site. So when you're doing your due diligence in the lead up to this policy, so stage 2 of the policy being released, it's really important to make sure that you're doing all of your thorough checks to make sure that it does line up with that policy. But for properties that do sit within that well-located area, there's going to be some really exciting changes that the state government is bringing in to allow the potential to bring further development and to bring further opportunity in infill sites, especially in well-located areas close to public transport, being train stations, and close to CBDs, local centres across areas where there is growth expected. So a lot of the changes are imminent, but as I said, some of the actual standards, there's going to be some really good opportunities for uplift. For example, a dual occupancy, if it's within a well-located area, they're proposing a 12-metre frontage. Now, there's not many councils. Newcastle's one, common one, but a lot of councils these days require around about that 15-metre frontage width, similar to a CDC. For a dual occupancy or a duplex. Under this new standard, they're proposing 12 metres. So that's going to open up a lot of blocks in close to train centres and local centres that may now be eligible to further develop. So it's going to open up more opportunities, more sites, more avenues. So people that already own some of these sites will be in quite a great position, because essentially you've got a site that in the past was only really valued at a site that could host one dwelling. All of a sudden you might be able to host 2. So like any type of change that comes in, often it's the early adopters that can do really well, because you're buying a site that was not otherwise realised. And I think often the market does take a bit of time to be educated in terms of what is possible and not possible. A lot of real estate agents or people that are selling the sites, or even the vendors that own the sites, often don't understand code and don't understand what's possible and not possible. So I think part of this podcast is obviously always trying to educate our listeners, yourselves, who are people who are passionate about investment, development, doing projects. We want to make sure we're constantly helping keep you up to speed with opportunities that may arise and that will arise across New South Wales. So, look, stage 2, it's now not out, but look, there is a good chance that we're going to see it come into effect, at least for dual occupancies for now. We're not sure about multi-dwelling yet. We saw that stage 1 only related to dual occupancies, so I guess we're unsure whether the stage 2 is going to bring into effect multi-dwelling and terraces and manor houses straight off the bat, or whether they're going to kick that stone down the road a little bit further. But in terms of dual occupancies, in a lot of council areas, you've not been able to do dual occupancies in R2 zone. Straight away, well-located areas, it opens that opportunity up. The frontage width is a really massive one. The 12-metre frontage width is huge. Another exciting one is the floor space ratio. So it's pretty common. Every council is slightly different, but it's very common, an R2 zoning in a lot of councils. If you look at the different zoning and floor space ratio across a lot of councils in New South Wales, it's quite common, that 50% floor space ratio in an R2 zoning. Under under this new policy, they're proposing a 65% floor space ratio, which is quite a lot more floor space. So those smaller blocks is going to open up an opportunity to do dual occupancies on smaller blocks, be able to get a reasonable sized dwelling where a family can live in those dwellings. So there's going to be some really great opportunities in a lot of councils. In terms of the height limit, it's slightly higher than probably the average height limit. So that'll be another great opportunity, and the lot size as well. They're proposing a slightly smaller lot size than most councils will allow for a dual occupancy. Now, these particular standards, for example, when you do a DA, when you lodge a DA, those particular constraints, for example, the lot size, the lot width, the height, the floor space ratio, and in terms of the proximity of where that dwelling is, if you tick those boxes as per this SEP, stage 2 of this SEP, the non-discretionary standards, when that gets implemented and put into the SEP, at the moment it's just a proposal, but once those non-discretionary standards are embedded into the SEP, that SEP, essentially those particular standards will override council's local policy. So if you submit a DA, for example, for a dual occupancy, and you tick the box with all of those standards, now you can't get variations on those standards. You have to meet those criteria. So council can't refuse that DA based on those elements. They can still refuse a DA based on not following council's development control plan, whether it be for overshadowing or view loss or streetscape. You still need to comply with council's development controls, but when it comes to those particular key constraints, they will override council's current policy in those well-located areas. So it's still important to factor in things like native trees on the site. Is there something that's going to impact this? Overshadowing? Are you going to be able to get good solar access to the property? Is that property going to cause adverse impact? There'll still be a lot of things that you will factor in, but the exciting thing is it does open up opportunity, and hopefully it will help us in achieving some of those housing targets, and also be able to put more housing within those closer areas to public transport and to local centres, which I think is a good idea and a smart idea. Now, there was also mention that these elements would come into effect as a CDC, but not until 1st of July 2025. Again, until this stage 1 gets released from a DA perspective, it's really up in the air. I'd be shocked if it comes into effect from a CDC point of view, 1st of July 2025. But again, it may do. And I'll be sure to do an episode as soon as we do know what's happening. I'll be sure to do an episode talking about this new low rise and how it impacts development from a complying development CDC fast track approval perspective. But at the moment, this episode is just really breaking down from a DA development application point of view. So, which leads us, obviously they're trying to create more housing. They've got targets they need to hit. I guess one of my concerns is that councils are struggling to manage DAs and to process DAs in a timely manner. So whether this new code coming into effect, my concern is how some councils will cope with additional volume when a lot of them aren't coping with the volume they currently have. That will be interesting. But I think the timing could be quite interesting of this code, stage 2, coming into effect. Hopefully this year we see some interest rate cuts. Hopefully we are starting to see inflation, a change in our inflation. So hopefully a lot of these things will sort of coincide with a strengthening of the market for people wanting to do projects. So for those investors and developers wanting to be on the precipice of and the cutting edge element of being ahead of the game. This is a strategy, I believe, that you could begin to exercise in and look into and look at avenues of where you can find sites that are in these well-located areas. I think it's a really good scope and space, even in this time of waiting, whether it be 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. Start looking around. Look around for sites. Get an idea of what these properties are worth. Get an idea, even start to run some numbers. What could that property that's now currently only able to house one dwelling that possibly could then put a dual occupancy, what could the uplift be from now to when you can actually realise the potential of being able to put a dual lock on that site? Just so you get to know the numbers, so you're well educated in terms of the possibilities. And that leads me to the next section, is the opportunity to do multi-dwelling within R2 zone in well-located areas. This is what I'm really excited about, because there's not a lot of councils that currently enable you to do multi-dwelling development in R2 low-density zoning. Now, under this new set policy, they're proposing that if you are within that well-located area that I mentioned, the 800 metres of a CBD or a train station, they've indicated they're going to allow the permissibility of multi-dwelling development, which is quite exciting, because it's going to open up a lot of opportunities, a lot of blocks to be able to do townhouse and small multi-dwelling projects. The possibility of either amalgamating some blocks or even just getting blocks that you would not have otherwise been able to do multi-dwelling on, and to be able to do these type of projects. So these sites, all of a sudden, we're seeing the proposal of a block having a 15-metre frontage, 600 square metres with quite a high floor space ratio, only one car space required per dwelling. There's some really good benefits, which in most councils would be the standard, or the ability to get a better yield will be a lot better under this new policy than what it currently would be under the development control plan. So again, once these policies come into effect, that's stage 2, council can't reject the DA based on those particular constraints. Again, you still need to comply with the rest of council's development control plan, but those particular non-discretionary standards, council can't reject the DA based on those standards if you meet those criteria. So, for example, some councils have a minimum frontage width of a block of, like, for example, some councils are 18 metres, some councils are 16, some are 20, some are even 25 metres. All of a sudden, if you've got a 15-metre wide block, 600 square metres, if you can prove that you can fit the elements that need to be fit on the site, you can put that case forward to council. So it's important, again, still to look at all of your elements. You still need to comply with overshadowing, car parking, private open space, solar access. There's all those elements you still need to comply with. So just because the block's 15 metres wide, 600 square metres, does not necessarily mean that you are going to be able to fit multiple dwellings, multi-dwelling on that site. But it is going to open up incredible opportunities, especially in those areas where multi-dwelling has not otherwise been allowed within that zoning. So I think for anyone wanting to get on the front foot, have a look at all the councils that currently don't allow multi-dwelling in R2 zoning, and look in that area within 800 metres of train stations, CBD, and just begin exercising in that space to see how many sites are available. And again, run the numbers. What's the site currently worth as a one standalone dwelling? What could you put on this site? What could the potential uplift be, even just in the value of the land alone? Because once this comes into effect, all of a sudden a site that currently can only house one dwelling, all of a sudden you can do 3 on it, or 4 even on some of the bigger sites. All of a sudden there could be just great uplift alone in that. So again, until it's on paper, until it's in policy, I'm not trusting in those non-discretionary standards. They may change. There's obviously a reason why it's taking a little bit longer. Possibly there could be some toing and froing from councils. There was a lot of submissions that came back when they initially put it out to people to respond to these changes. So there may be some fighting and some different things happening in the background that we don't know about. But if they do implement these changes that they've proposed from a multi-dwelling point of view, it will be very exciting to be able to do multi-dwelling in areas that have not previously been able to happen. So look, my encouragement is we'll put some links in the show notes to some of the links to the New South Wales planning website where you can read up a little bit more and educate yourself a little bit more on this low-rise policy that is coming into effect, just so you can educate yourself and keep up to date around where things are at. I would love to be able to have a date to give you on when Stage 2 is released. Not yet there, but look, as soon as Stage 2 comes into effect, we'll do another episode and I'll literally break it down piece by piece for both dual occupancy attached dwelling and also multi-dwelling, terraces, manor houses, so that people wanting to do those different types of developments can be highly educated around how you're able to tackle this new opportunity in New South Wales, especially as we push towards developing more housing and dealing with this housing shortage that we do have in our state. So look, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I encourage you to share it with friends, family, colleagues, people that are interested in the property space. And look, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll see you next week.